My name is Lila. I'm 28 years old. And for my entire life, I've been the responsible one in my family, the reliable daughter. This was supposed to be the moment that proved it all paid off. After years of grinding as a software engineer, I was finally closing on my first house. My own house. But when I called my parents, buzzing with excitement, my mom cut me off. She said, "That's nice, honey, but we need you to co-sign a loan. Your brother Kyle needs a $100,000 investment for his streaming career." $100,000. The words just hung there, sucking all the air out of the room. A gut punch of disbelief and humiliation washed over me. But what I didn't know was that this conversation was just the beginning, because their next move would give me the power to destroy everything they had. After that phone call ended, something inside me shifted. The constant ache of seeking their approval. It didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something hard, something focused. I stopped thinking about what they wanted from me and started focusing on what I wanted for myself. And what I wanted was out. I poured every ounce of that frustration, every bit of that simmering anger, not into arguments they would never hear, but into my work. My career became my sanctuary, my escape. At the tech firm in Austin where I worked as a software engineer, I wasn't just Lila, the reliable daughter. I was Lila, the lead developer, the problem solver, the one who stayed late not because she had to, but because the clean, logical world of code was a welcome relief from the chaotic mess of my family life. My boss, a guy named Frank, who had been in the industry for 20 years, saw it. He didn't pry into my personal life, he just saw the results. He saw the extra hours, the elegant solutions to complex bugs, the way I mentored junior developers without ever being asked. He started giving me more responsibility, trusting me with bigger and bigger pieces of our projects. While my parents were celebrating Kyle's 1,000th hour of playing video games, I was leading sprint planning meetings, interfacing with clients, and rewriting legacy code that made our entire system run 20% faster. My colleagues respected me. They came to me with questions. My input mattered. It was a feeling so foreign, so intoxicating, that I chased it relentlessly. The big one came about a year ago. It was a project codenamed Odyssey, a new enterprise application that had the potential to land us a multi-million-dollar contract with a huge logistics company. It was a beast. A complex, high-stakes project that had everyone on edge. Frank put me in charge of the core architecture team. For 6 months, Odyssey was my entire life. I sacrificed weekends. I canceled dates. I survived on coffee and takeout Thai food. My apartment became a cave of whiteboards covered in system diagrams and sticky notes. I remember one night, staring at a particularly nasty problem around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. A blurry photo of Kyle holding up a cheap-looking trophy from some local gaming tournament. The caption read, "Our champion, so proud." I looked at the picture, then back at the lines of code on my screen that represented millions of dollars and the work of a dozen people. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt distant, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. I put the phone down and solved the problem. We launched Odyssey on a Tuesday. The client was ecstatic. The contract was signed the following week. It was a massive win for the company, the biggest in 5 years. Frank called me into his office a few weeks later. He had this grin on his face. He told me how the CEO couldn't stop talking about the project, how it had positioned us as industry leaders. He said, "Lila, you're not just a great coder. You're a leader. You're the most valuable asset we have." Then he slid an envelope across the desk. "The board approved a special performance bonus for the Odyssey team lead," he said. "This is for you." I opened it later in the privacy of my car. I was expecting a nice number. Maybe $20,000, $30,000. I unfolded the check. My brain took a second to process the zeros. It was for $250,000, $250,000. I just sat there, in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the one I bought myself, and stared at it. This piece of paper was worth more than every gift, every dollar of support my parents had ever given my brother. It was validation. It was freedom. It was power. And my first instinctual thought was, they can never know. They had no idea. To them, I was still just Lila, working her boring office job, probably struggling to pay rent on her little one-bedroom apartment. When my mom called and asked how work was, I'd just say, "It's good. Busy." I let them keep that image of me, the struggling, self-sufficient daughter who never asked for anything. It was safer that way. It was my armor. While they were worrying about Kyle's internet connection, I was meeting with a financial advisor. While they were giving him a few $100 for a new gaming chair, I was quietly moving that bonus into high-yield savings and investment accounts. And a few months after that, I started looking at houses. Not just browsing online, but actually going to open houses, talking to a realtor. I found a small, charming bungalow in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city limits. It had a big backyard and a detached garage that would be perfect for a home office. I used the bonus, plus every penny I had saved since college, to make a down payment so significant that my monthly mortgage was less than what most people paid in rent. All of it. In secret. That house, that money, that career. It was my secret weapon. It was my escape plan, being built brick by brick, dollar by dollar, right under their noses. They thought I was standing still, but I was building a fortress, and I had a feeling I was going to need it. I was living in this strange bubble of quiet success, moving the pieces of my new life into place when the calls started. They began subtly, woven into the usual weekly check-ins. It was my mom, Brenda, at first. Her voice had this syrupy sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. She'd ask about work, and then, casually, "So, that apartment you're in, is your lease up for renewal soon? Are you thinking of staying there long term?" The first time, I brushed it off. The second time, a week later, it felt pointed. I gave her a vague answer, something about liking the area, and she quickly changed the subject. But the question just hung there in the back of my mind. Why did she care about my lease? Then my dad, Richard, started. He never called just to chat. His calls were always transactional, efficient. One evening, he called, and after a few pleasantries, he asked, "Lila, I was just looking over some of our old financial paperwork. What's your credit score looking like these days? It's good to keep track of these things, you know." My father had never once in my entire adult life asked about my credit score. He was the one who refused to co-sign my first student loan because he didn't want it to affect his portfolio. The question was so out of character that it felt like a record scratch. A cold knot of suspicion started to form in my stomach. I told him it was fine, and he just grunted and said, "Good, good," before ending the call. It felt like an interrogation disguised as fatherly concern. They were probing, fishing for information. But for what? I had this growing sense of dread, like the feeling you get when you hear a floorboard creak in an empty house. You know something's there, you just don't know what it is yet. The world tilted on its axis 3 months later. I got a call in the middle of a workday. It was my dad. His voice was flat. He told me that my grandmother, my mom's mom, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. My grandma Eleanor was the one exception in my family, the one person whose eyes would genuinely light up when I walked into a room. She was the one who taught me how to bake, who would slip me $20 on my birthday and whisper, "Don't tell your mother." She saw me. She truly saw me. Losing her felt like the last safe harbor in my life had just been washed away by a storm. The grief was immense, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hushed condolences. My family, of course, turned it into a performance. My mother wept dramatically. My father stood stoically, accepting sympathies like he was closing a business deal. Kyle looked bored, scrolling on his phone when he thought no one was watching. I just felt numb. After the service, my dad, as the executor of the will, gathered us in my grandmother's small, quiet living room. He held up a document and cleared his throat. He said that Grandma Eleanor's finances were modest, and after settling her final expenses, there wasn't much left. He announced that her house would be sold and the proceeds would go to my mother. Then he turned to Kyle and me. He handed my brother an old wristwatch that had belonged to my grandfather. Then he looked at me and handed me a small, dusty jewelry box. "Your grandmother wanted you to have her collection of porcelain birds," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Porcelain birds. I felt a fresh wave of grief, but also confusion. My grandmother and I had talked about my future. She knew I was trying to save up, to build a life for myself. She'd always said, "A smart girl like you needs a proper start, Lila." Porcelain birds just didn't seem right. But in the fog of my grief, I didn't question it. I just clutched the box and nodded, the tiny, fragile birds inside feeling as brittle as my heart. For the next few weeks, I tried to navigate my grief. I went to work. I came home. I stared at the walls of my new house, a place that was supposed to represent my victory, but now just felt empty. One Saturday, I forced myself to go to the grocery store, needing to feel some semblance of normalcy. I was in the produce aisle trying to decide between kale and spinach when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Lila? Is that you?" I turned around to see Mr. Henderson, a retired lawyer who had been my grandmother's neighbor and close friend for over 30 years. He was a kind, gentle man with a warm smile. We hugged, and he expressed his sincere condolences. "Your grandmother was a wonderful woman," he said, his eyes misting over. "She was so incredibly proud of you, you know. She talked about you all the time." My throat tightened. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That means a lot." He patted my arm. "She was so happy she could leave you a proper nest egg to get you started. She knew you'd be smart with it. $100,000 is no small sum for a young woman these days." The world stopped. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store seemed to hum louder. The smell of fresh cilantro faded. All I could hear was a roaring in my ears. I must have looked as stunned as I felt, because his smile faltered. What did you say?" I managed to whisper. Mr. Henderson looked confused. "The inheritance. From your grandmother's will. She left you $100,000, clear and simple. She had me look over the will myself before she signed it, just to be sure everything was in order. She wanted to make certain that money went directly to you." He saw the look on my face, a mixture of shock and dawning horror. I shook my head slowly. "Mr. Henderson, my father told me she only left me her porcelain birds." His jaw dropped. For a moment, he was speechless. He reached into his briefcase, he always carried it, even to the grocery store, and pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a moment. "Eleanor was a sharp woman," he said, his voice now grim. "She didn't trust your father as much as he thought. She sent me a digital copy of the signed will for my personal records just in case." He turned the phone screen towards me, and there it was, in clear, undeniable black and white. A legal document, signed and witnessed. Article 3. I hereby bequeath the sum of $100,000, $100,000, to my beloved granddaughter, Lila Peterson. A single cold thought cut through the fog of my grief. They stole from me. It wasn't just money. It was my grandmother's last gift. Her final act of love and belief in me. And they had taken it. My father, my mother, and I had no doubt. My brother had looked me in the eye, while I was grieving and lied. They had conspired together to steal my inheritance, to erase my grandmother's final wish, and hand it over to Kyle for his ridiculous streaming career. The porcelain birds in the box on my dresser suddenly felt like a sick joke, a symbol of how little they thought of me, how fragile and worthless they believed I was. The numbness I had been feeling for weeks was burned away by a sudden white-hot rage. A fury so pure and so intense, it made me feel dizzy. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had desecrated the memory of the one person in my family who had ever truly loved me. And in that moment, standing in the middle of the produce aisle, I knew that this was not something I could forgive. This was not something I could forget. This was the end. And that's when I realized, after all the years of sacrifice, my family had rejected me in the most brutal way possible. At this point, I don't even know what word to use to describe how that felt. If you're feeling as outraged as I am right now, do me a favor and comment with one word that describes what my family did. But instead of breaking down, that outrage turned into a cold, hard strength. I don't remember paying for my groceries. I don't remember the drive home. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the kitchen of my house, the house they knew nothing about, gripping the edge of the granite countertop so hard my knuckles were white. The copy of my grandmother's will that Mr. Henderson had emailed me was glowing on my phone screen. $100,000. The number seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a testament to my grandmother's love and my family's treachery. There were no tears. The time for tears was over. The grief for my grandmother was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was now surrounded by something else. Something cold, sharp, and clear. It was the chilling calm that comes after the storm, when the wind dies down and you can finally see the full extent of the wreckage. For 28 years, I had been playing a game I could never win. I thought that if I was responsible enough, successful enough, independent enough, eventually, they would see me. They would acknowledge me. I see now that was never the point. My independence wasn't something to be proud of. It was their excuse to ignore me. My strength wasn't a virtue. It was their justification for giving all their resources to my brother. Every success I had only reinforced their narrative. Lila's fine. She can take care of herself. Kyle needs us. They were never going to change. That thought didn't break my heart anymore. It was liberating. The hope that had tethered me to their approval for so long finally snapped. I was adrift, but for the first time, I felt free. A quiet, determined voice in my head spoke with absolute certainty. Enough. This will never, ever happen again. The pain didn't vanish. It simply transmuted, transforming from a source of weakness into fuel, a cold, clean-burning fuel for what I knew I had to do next. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't even call them to confront them. What would be the point? They would just lie, gaslight me, and call me overly sensitive. Brenda would cry, Richard would bluster, and Kyle would play the innocent victim. No. This wasn't going to be a messy, emotional confrontation. This was going to be a strategy, a quiet, methodical dismantling of the fiction they had built their lives upon. I walked into my home office, the one I had built with my own money, and sat down at my desk. I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, not writing code, but searching. I looked for the best probate and estate litigation attorneys in the state. I spent an hour cross-referencing reviews, case histories, and legal specialties. I made a list of the top 3. The next Monday morning, I took a personal day from work. At precisely 9:01 a.m., I called the first lawyer on my list. His name was Arthur Vance. He was a no-nonsense, straight-talking attorney in his late 50s, with a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom. I explained the situation calmly and concisely, emailing him a copy of the will Mr. Henderson had given me, along with a timeline of my father's actions as the executor. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Peterson," he finally said, his voice a low rumble, "what your father has done is not just unethical. It is textbook fraudulent conveyance. It is illegal. We can not only sue for the full amount of your inheritance, but also for punitive damages and legal fees." He told me the first step was to send an official letter of demand to my father, putting him on notice. I agreed. But then, Arthur said something that changed everything. "Just for due diligence, I'm running a quick public records check on your father, Richard Peterson. Standard procedure." He was quiet for a few minutes, the only sound being the soft clicking of his keyboard. "Well now," he said, his tone shifting from professional to intrigued. "This is interesting." "What is it?" I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "It appears your father's financial situation is not as stable as one might assume," Arthur said. "He has several outstanding liens against his primary residence, and it seems the property went into pre-foreclosure 2 weeks ago. The bank is scheduled to auction it off in 45 days. I felt a jolt, like a low-voltage electric shock. All those strange calls, my mother asking about my lease, my father asking about my credit score. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. They weren't just stealing my inheritance to buy Kyle a house. They were stealing it to save themselves. They were going to let their own house go into foreclosure, use my money to set Kyle up in a new place, and then, I had no doubt, they would have shown up on my doorstep, feigning homelessness, expecting me to take them in. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of their plan left me speechless. They weren't just users, they were parasites, willing to drain their own daughter dry to maintain their comfortable lifestyle and coddle their golden child. And that's when the new idea began to form. A wild, audacious, and frankly terrifying idea. But it felt right. It felt like justice. A calm, cold wave of certainty washed over me. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "Hold off on that letter of demand regarding the inheritance. We'll get to that later. I have a different priority now." "I'm listening," he said. "That house," I said. "The one in pre-foreclosure. I want to buy it." There was another pause. "Ms. Peterson," he said carefully, "that could be a complicated and emotionally fraught process." "I'm aware," I replied. "I want you to help me set up an LLC, a shell corporation with an anonymous name. I want that LLC to contact the bank and make an all-cash offer to buy the house before it ever goes to auction. I want to be the one who owns it. I want them to have no idea who they're dealing with until it's too late." Arthur was silent for a full 10 seconds. I could almost hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Finally, he let out a low whistle. "Ms. Peterson," he said, and I could hear the hint of a smile in his voice. "I have been practicing law for 30 years. And this is going to be one of my favorite cases." The rest of the week was a blur of focused activity. I transferred a significant portion of my savings and my bonus into a new account. I signed documents electronically, creating Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC. Arthur and his team worked with incredible speed, contacting the bank's loss mitigation department. The bank, eager to avoid the uncertainty of an auction, was more than happy to entertain an all-cash offer that would cover the outstanding mortgage and its fees. They had no idea the offer was coming from the daughter of the homeowners they were foreclosing on. My family, meanwhile, was completely oblivious. My mom left me a voicemail a few days later, her voice saccharine sweet, asking if I'd thought any more about helping Kyle out. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. They were busy playing checkers, moving their pieces around in their small, petty game. They had no idea that I was about to flip the entire board over. I wasn't just going to get my money back, I was going to become their landlord, and the game was about to change. Permanently. The call came 3 weeks after I'd hired Arthur. It was my mother. Her voice was dripping with forced cheerfulness, a tone she only used when she wanted something big. "Lila, honey, your father and I have the most wonderful news, and we want to celebrate. We're having a special family dinner on Saturday night, just the four of us. You have to be here." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I knew instantly what this was. This was the stage. This was the moment they had been planning for. The final act of their little play. "I'll be there," I said, my voice perfectly calm. A cold, electric thrill ran through me. They had no idea they weren't the ones setting the trap. They were walking right into mine. I spent the rest of the week preparing. Arthur had closed the deal with the bank. The house, the home I had grown up in, was now legally owned by Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC, my LLC. Arthur had couriered the official deed and all the relevant paperwork to my house. I also had him draft a formal 30-day notice to vacate, citing the change in ownership. It was all legal, official, and ironclad. I put everything into a crisp manila folder. On Saturday, I chose my outfit carefully. Not a suit, that would be too confrontational. Not a dress, that would be too soft. I chose dark jeans, a simple black blouse, and a leather jacket. It was armor. It was the uniform of someone who was there for business, not a family dinner. When I arrived, the house was filled with the smell of my mother's roast chicken, a scent that used to mean comfort, but now just smelled of deceit. The table was set with the good china, the kind reserved for holidays. Kyle was lounging on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, and barely grunted a hello. My father, Richard, was beaming, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. My mother, Brenda, rushed to hug me, her embrace feeling brittle and false. They were so confident, so sure of their power over me. They poured wine, they made small talk about my work, which they clearly didn't understand. I played along. I was polite. I was detached. I was a stranger in my own childhood home, watching actors read their lines. After we ate, my father cleared his throat theatrically. "Well," he said, beaming at Kyle, who finally looked up from his phone. "As you know, your mother and I have been working on securing your brother's future." He made it sound like they were funding a Nobel Prize-winning venture, not propping up a 30-year-old man-child. "And we found the most perfect place for him," my mother chimed in, practically vibrating with excitement. "A beautiful little condo downtown, perfect for a young professional. It's an investment, really." My father then slid a stack of papers across the table towards me. They were thick with legal jargon, but I could clearly see the heading: Loan Application and Co-Signer Agreement. "Now, Lila," he said, his voice taking on a condescendingly patient tone. "We know you're doing well for yourself, and you've always been so responsible. Your brother's credit isn't quite where it needs to be to secure a mortgage of this size on his own. So, we just need you to help him out. Just a little signature, as his sister, to co-sign the loan. It's really just a formality. We'll handle all the payments, of course." A formality. He wanted me to legally tie my financial future, the future I had bled and sweat for, to my irresponsible brother, using my stolen inheritance as the down payment on a property I would be on the hook for if, or rather, when, he defaulted. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. They sat there, smiling, expectant, so sure that I would fold, that the good, reliable daughter would do her duty one last time. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring their clueless confidence. I looked at my father's smug face, my mother's anxious smile, my brother's entitled smirk, and I felt nothing. The part of me that had once craved their approval was gone, burned away in the fire of their betrayal. Slowly, I pushed their stack of papers back across the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own manila folder, placing it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. "I won't be signing those," I said. My voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "But I do have some paperwork of my own that you all need to see." I opened the folder. The first document I slid across the table was the deed. My father picked it up, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read the first line, then read it again. I watched as the color drained from his face. My mother leaned over, squinting at the paper. "Oak Ridge Holdings? What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That," I said, leaning forward slightly, "is the name of the LLC that purchased this house from the bank last week." My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning to panic. "What are you talking about? The bank. We were negotiating with them." "No," I corrected him calmly. "You were defaulting. I was negotiating, and my all-cash offer was much more appealing to them than your missed payments." Kyle finally put his phone down, his mouth hanging open. You bought our house?" he stammered. I ignored him, my eyes locked on my father. "It's my house now," I said. Then I slid the second document across the table. It landed right in front of him. "And this," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper, "is your official 30-day notice to vacate the premises." The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where their self-assured world had just been. It was like I had detonated a bomb in the middle of their perfect little dinner party, and they were the stunned survivors, covered in the dust and debris of a reality they had never conceived of. My father just stared at the eviction notice, his face a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. My mother started making a strange, choking sound, her hand flying to her chest. Kyle looked back and forth between me and his parents, his brain struggling to catch up. He looked like a child who had just been told that Santa Claus wasn't real. For the first time in my entire life, I had all the power. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cried. I had simply presented them with the cold, hard facts. I had used their own game of finances and paperwork against them. And I had won. I stood up from the table. "My lawyer, Mr. Vance, will be in touch regarding the logistics of the move," I said, my voice steady. "He'll also be contacting you, Dad, about the $100,000 inheritance you stole from me. You have 30 days. And with that, I turned around and walked out of my house, leaving them to sit in the ruins of the life they had built on lies. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. The image of their stunned, horrified faces burned into my memory. A strange sense of calm settled over me. It wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was just quiet. The quiet of a decision made, a line crossed. The quiet of finality. But that quiet didn't last long. By the time I was halfway back to my own house, my phone started to explode. The first call was from my mother, Brenda. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text message popped up. All caps. "Lila, call me this instant. This is not funny." I ignored it. Then a call from my father, Richard. I ignored that too. Then Kyle. Then my mother again. It was a frantic, desperate symphony of rings and vibrations. The shock had worn off, and the panic was setting in. When I got home, I put my phone on silent and poured myself a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. I had expected this. This was part of the plan. The voicemail notification blinked. Against my better judgment, I listened to the first one from my mother. It was exactly what I'd predicted. Her voice was a high-pitched, hysterical wail. "Lila, how could you? This has to be some kind of sick joke. Your father is beside himself. You can't just, you can't just throw your own family out on the street. What have you done? What have you done? It was pure, unfiltered panic. The realization that their safety net had just been yanked away, and that I was the one holding the knife. The next voicemail was from my father. His voice was no longer smug. It was a low, guttural growl, shaking with rage. "You listen to me," he snarled. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you are going to stop it right now. You will call off this lawyer of yours, and you will come back here, and we will discuss this like a civilized family. You have gone too far. You are destroying this family." Destroying the family. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They thought the family was this perfect, pristine thing that I was now smashing with a hammer, completely oblivious to the fact that it was already rotten to the core, hollowed out by their own greed and favoritism. Then came the texts from Kyle. At first, they were just confused. WTF was that? Then, as the reality sank in, they became desperate, pleading, and finally pathetic. "Lil, a plea. See, you can't do this. All my streaming stuff is here, my whole setup." Then, "I'll pay you back. I swear, I'll get a job. Just tell me how much you want. We can work this out." He was trying to bargain, like a child trying to negotiate for a later bedtime. He didn't understand that this was never about the money. Not really. It was about the principle. The years of being treated like an afterthought, a walking ATM, a convenience. It was about the fact that they had tried to steal my grandmother's final gift to me. That was a debt no amount of money could ever repay. The real fireworks started the next day. A little after noon, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. It was all three of them, standing on my doorstep. On the doorstep of the house they didn't know I owned. My father was red-faced, my mother looked like she had been crying for 24 hours straight, and Kyle was hiding behind them, looking sullen. For a moment I considered not answering, but I knew they wouldn't leave. This confrontation was inevitable. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stood there, blocking the entrance. Before I could say a word, my father started shouting. "What is the meaning of this, Lila? You think you can just buy our home out from under us and throw us out? After everything we've done for you?" Everything they'd done for me. The words were so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that I almost laughed. But I kept my expression neutral. "This is my property," I said calmly. "I would appreciate it if you didn't shout." My mother pushed past him, her face a mess of tears and fury. The manipulation phase had begun. "How could you be so cruel?" she sobbed, trying to grab my arm. I stepped back. "We are your family. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. Is this how you repay me? By making us homeless?" "You weren't going to be homeless," I stated, my voice still even. "You planned to use my stolen inheritance to buy Kyle a condo, and then move in with me after the bank took your house. Don't pretend this is some noble tragedy. This is the consequence of your own actions." The mention of the stolen inheritance made her flinch. My father's face hardened. He switched tactics from anger to blame. "This is all your fault," he spat. "You've always been selfish, always so focused on your career, your money. You never cared about this family. You're cold, Lila, just like your grandmother." He said it like an insult, but it felt like a compliment. If being like my grandmother meant I was independent and saw through their lies, then I would gladly wear that label. "I have nothing more to say to you," I said, starting to close the door. "Any further communication needs to go through my lawyer." That's when Kyle finally spoke up, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and entitlement. "So that's it? You're just going to ruin our lives? What are we supposed to do?" "That's not my problem anymore, Kyle," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You're 30 years old. It's time you figured it out for yourself." My father put his hand on the door, stopping me from closing it. His eyes were blazing with a desperate, cornered animal rage. "You will regret this," he hissed. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life. You are choosing money over family." "No," I said, and my voice was clear and strong, without a tremor of doubt. "I'm choosing me. You three made it very clear a long time ago that I wasn't really part of this family, not in the way that mattered. You just saw me as a resource, an emergency fund, a backup plan. Well, the backup plan just quit." I looked at each of them one last time. At my father's impotent rage, my mother's performative tears, and my brother's childish bewilderment. And I felt a profound sense of closure. The war was over. I had won. I pushed the door shut, ignoring their shouts and the frantic banging that followed. I walked to the back of my house, slid the glass door open, and stepped out into my quiet backyard. The sun was shining. I could hear birds chirping. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt a sense of peace. The storm of their chaos was still raging outside my walls, but in here, in the life that I had built for myself, it was finally calm. After I closed the door on them, the banging and shouting continued for a few minutes before finally fading away. The silence they left behind was heavy, thick with unspoken threats and years of resentment. My first move was simple, but powerful. I picked up my phone, went to their contacts, and pressed block. My father, my mother, my brother. 3 taps. It felt like severing 3 toxic cables that had been draining my energy my entire life. I then sent a short, professional email to my lawyer, Arthur Vance. I detailed the confrontation at my doorstep and gave him a clear directive. "Arthur," I wrote, "from this moment forward, I will not be communicating with Richard, Brenda, or Kyle Peterson directly. All communication regarding the eviction from my property and the recovery of my stolen inheritance must go through you, no exceptions." It was a declaration of independence. It was me, drawing a line in the sand, not with anger, but with the cold, hard finality of a legal boundary. I was no longer their daughter, the one they could guilt and manipulate. I was at Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC. I was a client. I was a problem they could no longer solve with crocodile tears or empty shouting. I was taking away their favorite weapon, access to me. The days that followed were a test. They tried to find cracks in my new walls. My mother started emailing me long, rambling messages filled with nostalgic photos from my childhood, alternating between, "I don't know my own daughter anymore," and, "Remember that family vacation to the Grand Canyon? We were so happy then." It was emotional warfare, pure and simple. I forwarded every single one to Arthur without replying. My father tried a different tactic. He left a voicemail on my office phone, his voice laced with false authority, threatening legal action of his own for emotional distress and elder abuse. Elder abuse. The audacity was almost impressive. Arthur found that one particularly amusing. Kyle just sent a series of sad face emojis. I blocked their email addresses too. I was building a fortress, but I quickly realized that a fortress can also be a prison if you're in it alone. The weight of what I had done, the sheer magnitude of cutting off my entire family, began to settle in during the quiet hours of the evening. It was the right decision, I knew that. But it was also profoundly lonely. That's when my real family started to show up. Not the family I was born into, but the one I had chosen. My best friend Maya, who had known about the family dynamics for years, showed up at my door the night after the big confrontation. She didn't even call first. She just appeared, holding 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's and a large pizza. She didn't press me for details. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just sat on the couch with me, put on a stupid action movie, and let me exist. We talked a little. I cried a little, and she just listened, providing a quiet, unwavering presence that was more comforting than any words could have been. She was the anchor in my storm. The next day at work, my boss, Frank, called me into his office. He closed the door and looked at me with genuine concern. "Lila," he said, "I don't know what's going on in your personal life, and it's none of my business. But I can tell something's weighing on you. I just wanted to say, if you need to take some time off, a few days, a week, whatever, just say the word. Your job will be here when you get back. The team has your back. I have your back." In that moment, he wasn't my boss. He was a mentor, a figure of stability, offering professional support without demanding anything in return. It was a kind of respect and care my own father had never shown me. The contrast was so stark it almost brought me to tears right there in his office. And then, there was Arthur, my lawyer. He was more than just a legal shark. He became an unexpected source of validation. During one of our calls, after he'd successfully fended off another blustering threat from my father's hastily hired lawyer, he paused. "You know, Lila," he said, his voice softer than usual. "In my line of work, I see a lot of families tear each other apart over money. But what you're doing here, it takes a rare kind of courage. You're not just fighting for a house or an inheritance. You're fighting for your own self-worth. You should be proud of that." Hearing that from him, a man who dealt in facts and figures, meant the world to me. He saw my actions not as revenge, but as reclamation. These people, Maya, Frank, Arthur, they were my new support system. They were the family I was building for myself, based not on obligation or blood, but on mutual respect, kindness, and genuine care. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place. I was just accepted, valued, for who I was, not for what I could provide. For the first time in her life, she didn't back down. She chose herself over their expectations. This was a huge moment. If you support Lila's powerful decision right here, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments to send her some strength on this journey. That support, even the unspoken kind, was exactly what she needed to start rebuilding her world from the ground up. The year that followed was the quietest of my life. The 30-day eviction notice came and went with a grim, legal finality. True to my word, I let Arthur handle everything. He was a firewall between my new life and the chaos of my old one. He coordinated with their lawyer, managed the transfer of the last of their belongings, and ensured the property was vacated without me ever having to see them or speak to them again. He also pursued the matter of my inheritance with the relentless precision of a predator. Faced with an airtight case for fraud and the threat of a very public, very ugly court battle, my father folded. The full $100,000, plus interest accrued, was wired into my account. The transaction was as sterile and impersonal as a bank statement, a quiet end to a lifetime of loud betrayals. Life after the storm is a strange thing. At first, the silence is deafening. The absence of the constant drama, the lack of manipulative phone calls and guilt-laden text messages, left a void. I had spent so much of my energy pushing against their negativity that, without it, I felt off balance. But slowly, gradually, I learned to fill that silence not with noise, but with peace. I sold the house I had grown up in, the one that held more bad memories than good. I didn't want to live in the shadow of what I'd had to do there. With the profits from that sale, plus my grandmother's inheritance finally in my possession, I bought a place that was truly mine. It was a little farther out from the city, a beautiful modern house with huge windows that let the Texas sunlight pour in. It had a sprawling backyard with a huge oak tree, perfect for the garden I'd always dreamed of. My career, which had always been my refuge, now became a source of genuine joy. Without the constant drain of my family's needs, I had more energy, more focus, More creativity. Frank noticed. 6 months after the showdown, he called me into his office and offered me the promotion to director of engineering. I was now leading a team of brilliant developers, building technology that I was genuinely excited about. I worked hard, but for the first time, it didn't feel like I was running from something. It felt like I was building towards something. My life became filled with my chosen family. Maya was a constant, a fixture at my weekend barbecues. Frank and his wife became mentors and friends. I even started dating someone, a kind architect who found my independence inspiring, not intimidating. My life was full. It was happy. It was mine. Of course, I wondered what had become of them. I didn't seek out information, but sometimes it finds you anyway. A distant cousin, someone who had always remained neutral, mentioned in a holiday email that my parents and Kyle had moved into a small, two-bedroom rental apartment in a less than desirable part of town. The life of comfortable suburban prestige that my father had worshipped and my mother had curated on Facebook was gone. Their safety net, the one they thought was woven from their social standing but was actually woven from my compliance, had vanished. The consequences were real, and they were hitting hard. My father, whose entire identity was tied to his title as a successful director, had been forced out of his comfortable early retirement. I heard he was doing some low-level consulting work, a humiliating step down for a man with such a fragile ego. My mother's social media presence went dark. There were no more posts of perfect family dinners, no more bragging about her son's artistic pursuits. It's hard to maintain a facade of perfection when your reality has crumbled. But the biggest shock was Kyle, the golden child, cocooned from reality for 3 decades, was finally forced to face the world. With no trust fund from my inheritance and no parents to subsidize his lifestyle, he had to get a job. A real 9-to-5, soul-crushing job. A friend of a friend who worked at a large telecommunications company told me she'd seen him there. He was working in a call center, taking inbound calls from angry customers complaining about their internet service. The irony was almost too perfect. The boy who complained that the family's internet was too slow for his video games was now the one on the other end of the line, forced to listen to those same complaints, day in and day out, for minimum wage. I thought that would be the last I ever heard from them. But about 2 months ago, late on a Tuesday night, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, but a flicker of curiosity made me answer. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Lila?" The voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. It took me a second to place it. It was Kyle, but it wasn't the voice I remembered. The lazy, arrogant drawl was gone. This voice was tired. It was thin. It sounded defeated. "Hey," he said quietly. "Look, I know I have zero right to be calling you, and I know you probably hate me. I get it. I would too." He took a shaky breath, and I could hear the sterile hum of an office in the background. He was probably on his break. I had to say it. "I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush, clumsy and unpracticed. I was a complete idiot. A lazy, entitled jerk who just took everything for granted. For my whole life, I watched Mom and Dad treat you like you were invisible, like you were just their backup plan, and I never said a word. Because it was easy for me, because I benefited from it. He paused, and I could hear him swallow. What we did, what I let them do, with Grandma Eleanor's money, that was the worst. It was just wrong. There's no excuse. I am so sorry, Lila. It was the first time in 30 years he had ever apologized for anything. And it was real. I could hear it. This wasn't a manipulation. This was the sound of a man who had finally been humbled by the harsh realities of a world that didn't revolve around him. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I let his words sink in. The old me, the younger me, would have either broken down in tears or lashed out in anger. But the me I was now, I was calm. "Thank you for saying that, Kyle," I said, and my voice was even. "I appreciate you making this call. I really do." I chose my next words carefully. But an apology doesn't fix everything. I'm in a good place now. A peaceful place. And I need to protect that. I hope you can understand. I was accepting the apology, but not opening the door. I was acknowledging his growth, but maintaining my boundary. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No, I get it. I totally understand. I had to say it." And we ended the call. I hung up and walked out into my backyard. The stars were out. The air was cool and crisp. That phone call wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a resolution of a different kind. It was proof that the cycle had been broken. It was the final, quiet confirmation that I had made the right choice. They always say that blood is thicker than water, a phrase often used to demand loyalty no matter the cost. But I've learned the truth is more complex. Respect is thicker than blood. Trust is thicker than blood. Kindness is thicker than blood. I lost the family I was born into, the one defined by obligation and DNA. But in its place, I discovered the profound strength of a family you choose, a family built on mutual support and genuine love. I learned that my value isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It's something I had to build and defend for myself. And I learned that financial independence is the ultimate form of freedom. It's the power to say no, the power to walk away, the power to create a life where you are the one who sets the terms. The peace I feel now, right here in this quiet garden under the stars, that is the greatest inheritance of all. And that brings me to you, to everyone listening. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who consistently devalued you? How did you find the strength to draw that line? I would love for you to share your own experiences in the comments below. And if this story has resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power and finding your voice. Thank you for listening.